me, John Paul Lake of the Kern Venture Group. We will be discussing raising your first round of capital. We'll probably cover a few other subjects besides that, but our goal today is to discuss some of the viewpoints on the other side of the table, what the investor is considering and thinking about when evaluating your startup and when you go to raise that first round of capital. So, John Paul, I want to thank you for joining us today and being with us here to discuss this subject. To kick things off, would you mind just giving us a background on yourself, and then we'll dive in deeper on Kern Venture Group as well, but just a little background on Kern Venture Group would be great too.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. It's a pleasure to be on today with you. And so my name is John Paul Lake. I do go by JP for short, and I am born and raised in Bakersfield. I come from a family business background. My family's business is called Rain for Rent. They've been in farming and irrigation and temporary liquid handling for about 86 years now, or 87 years. Formerly, I started my career with Intel in corporate finance, and then got my MBA from the University of Virginia, Darden School of Business. And then came back to Bakersfield to work at Bolthouse Farms, where I was in brand management, helped expand the juice and smoothie product line, as well as launch the salad dressing line. And then was at Rainfront for a while before starting Kern Venture Group, which is the first angel investment fund in Kern County. And then I spent a lot of time also in a nonprofit capacity trying to help build an entrepreneurial ecosystem in Kern County. And I'm doing that through a foundation that my wife and I started called the Seed Corps Foundation. And our efforts around entrepreneurship are under the umbrella of KITE, which stands for the Kern Initiative for Talent and Entrepreneurship.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Well, let's jump right into. You mentioned that you were the first angel group to come through Kern, and that's a pretty interesting accolade there. Would you mind describing a little bit about how that came to be? So maybe where the inspiration came from, and then also how it all came together to formalize.
Sure. So there were a number of, I think, business owners and families with means who were maybe doing some investing personally as individual angels, but there was no coordinated effort. There wasn't even kind of a loose club or membership group, if you will. And so a number of those people kind of got together, called a meeting, would have been probably 2017, I think. And there was a lot of interest in the room about getting something like this started. And but unfortunately, it was going to die on the vine, so to speak, because when they asked who had the time to help run it or get it going, nobody's hand was raised. And I just believe that entrepreneurship is really, really important for the future of the Central Valley. And so I wasn't willing to let it die there. So I spent a few months trying to find someone else who could maybe co-chair it with me. And we weren't even sure what form it would take at that point. So we looked at several different models, including hiring an outside group to provide the back office and administration and even do some of the due diligence on companies. But ultimately what we landed on is we set up a formal fund structure like most of your venture capital, private equity, and hedge funds do. And so we first found 5 general partners who were willing to share in this vision. And they put in the riskiest capital, which is basically the working capital to get everything up and running, and to pay a modest amount for my time and my co-founder's time, David Higdon. So once we had those general partners in place, that brought a lot of credibility to it based on their names and relationships in the community. And then we found about another 15 limited partners that came in. And so our first fund is small. It's a little bit over $2 million. And I'm sure we'll talk more about how that operates and what we look for and how we do that. So we formed the fund late 2018 and started making investments in January of 2019. And now we're in the process of raising our second fund. So we're off to an exciting start. It's been a lot of fun. Excellent.
And going into it further, I know you have a great list of general partners there. Looking on your website, I know you have quite an advisory group going on that is reviewing some of the investments you're considering, some of the companies that you're looking at. Would you relate to the audience, just from your side of the table, how valuable is it having an advisory group with a variety of backgrounds and experiences that can share their insights into what potential investments, may or may not fit the prospect of your fund?
Yeah, having a formal advisory board is helpful, but I would say we use our informal advisors and network and connections as much, if not more. It's very, very valuable. In fact, one of the favorite due diligence activities that we do when we meet a startup that we like is we reach out to those advisors or people in our network who might know that industry or understand that technology. Or even better, they might own a company that could be a potential customer for the startup. And we love to introduce startups to companies and potential customers, because customer's voice is ultimately the most important. And if the startup does well when we put them in front of a customer, we really value that feedback as a form of due diligence.
Excellent. And transitioning more into, I guess, the investment thesis here, I'd love to learn a little bit more. I know it's on your website, but for the audience here, what is Kern Venture Group looking for in their investments? Let's start. We'll dive deeper into it, but just at the high level, how would you classify that?
Well, our long-term mission and vision is to help entrepreneurs in Kern County and Fresno County and the broader kind of Central Valley and Central Coast region. That's really what drives our passion and why we do what we do. That's first and foremost. If we can make money doing it as investors, that's great. I would say it's a close second to that mission purpose that we have. So whenever we see companies that are founded and headquartered here in the Central Valley, we're very, very interested, and we always want to at least take the first meeting. Beyond that, we look for products or services that we think are relevant and will have a direct, beneficial impact on our communities in the Central Valley, and that can lead us into a lot of different things. And happy to talk maybe even through some of our portfolio examples that on the surface maybe you don't see the connection, but I think in almost all cases there is a connection to our way of life and our communities in the Central Valley and the Central Coast. So that's kind of our I would say our first two criteria, which is the first pass screen. One other thing I would add is we do like to support founders who are from here, but for whatever reason, maybe they've started their company in another community. So we have two portfolio investments that met that criteria as well. After that first pass, we then get into some of the more traditional due diligence types of things, valuations and market sizes and strategy and team and all that good stuff that I know we're going to talk about today.
Excellent. Well, you made the suggestion. I'm going to follow up on that, but you talked about the portfolio companies. If you wouldn't mind, it'd actually be great just to hear just some of the stories of the companies of how you met, what the process looked like, why you invested in them. And then I think from there we can maybe derive other questions and find some themes. But if there's any companies that come to mind on why they were here in the Central Valley, why they would be a good example case study for founders that are looking to raise money, it'd be good to hear those stories.
Yeah, so we meet companies through all kinds of different ways. So, but I would say we've seen a lot out of Cal Poly lately. Have a number of companies we've invested in out of there. We've seen some come through the Santa Barbara Angel Groups or through the Tech Coast Angels or the Angel Syndication Network. Locally, we've seen them just be referred to us by word of mouth. We actually also get a fair number of inbound pitch decks just through our website. And maybe the funniest story is David Higdon, my co-founder and partner. His dad has coffee with a group of retired guys at McDonald's. This was pre-COVID, but they would get together. I don't know if it was every morning or once a week in the morning at a McDonald's. And one day at one of these coffee meetings, a friend of his mentioned, "Hey, there's this company that's doing something around table grape harvesting, and I think maybe your son David should look at it." And so, sure enough, we got this introduction to a company which now is called Vinergy, and that led ultimately to us being their lead investor. And they are based in Bakersfield, and they are building electric carts that help with table grape harvesting. And so they're growing. We're very involved. In fact, I'm sitting at the Vinergy office today. I do sit on the board, as well as I'm doing an interim CFO type of role for them. And their pilot project this year is actually a fully autonomous version of the cart. So very exciting. Maybe another one that's close to home is a company called Millet. Millet has developed a 100% plant-based alternative to buttermilk. And buttermilk on the surface maybe doesn't sound too exciting, but actually that buttermilk base is used to make a lot of different products, such as a creamy salad dressing or drinkable yogurts and ice creams. And buttermilk even goes into things like pancake mixes and all kinds of things. So we were the very first money in on that one. I actually don't remember how we found Millet. I think they found us on the website. They liked that we were Bakersfield based, and they wanted a group that was maybe not the same style or pressure or as some of the big venture capital firms that are in Silicon Valley and other places. And so we connected and related on that level. And pleased to say that over the last 2 years, as they launched the product, we helped them rebrand. They got into Whole Foods in the Northeast, and now they're going national with Whole Foods, and they just landed Sprouts nationally just a couple of weeks ago. It's a father-son team that has food science background and expertise. They've developed the whole product line. So we're very excited about Millet as well as many of our other companies. But that's just sort of two examples. They come in from all kinds of different sources. And of course, we've had some connection with you and the team at the Wet Center, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to work with companies coming through your program.
Of course, we look forward to that. Now, two things here I noticed with those stories is we've got two very different technologies, right? So one of the questions I have for you is, when you're evaluating a technology type, obviously you're not within a specific segment, but is there any areas that you like to focus on, or any areas that you're more privy to take an investment into?
Yeah, with our first fund, we were very industry agnostic by choice, with the exception being we don't have the right background or skill set to evaluate, pharma or biotech, anything of that nature. We're not the right team for those types of companies. But beyond that, we're happy to look at anything. In our second fund, we do plan to narrow our focus a little bit. We'd like to be a little more focused around ag tech, as well as renewable energy, since energy, certainly in Kern County, is a big existing industry, but it's undergoing a lot of change, and we'd like to help be a part of changing it to still create jobs for the future. And then aerospace is another interesting area to us, again, because Kern has the spaceport out in Mojave and Edwards Air Force Base and the China Lake Naval Weapons Center. So we're trying to, again, support the regional economy in that way. And advanced manufacturing is another one, which that's very broad, but we think it's relevant. There's a lot of skill sets in the Central Valley that could allow for us to build more manufacturing businesses in the Central Valley. So we're going to narrow it a little bit, but in general, we're pretty industry agnostic. I think the second part of your question is, so within maybe that broad industry set, what do we look for in terms of a company? We're not necessarily looking for the billion-dollar unicorn potential. That's always great if we find something that we think could be that. And I think most of the angel and venture community is hunting for those unicorns. We know that they are few and far between, and we're not sure that we're smart enough to figure those out. So we're happy to see companies that, I would say if they can get, to a $10 million in revenue or beyond, that's when we're interested. And so, they need to show us that the market size is at least 100 million, because I think a 10%, capture is a reasonable business plan. And so we're willing to look at maybe some of those smaller size businesses that other angel and VC groups just are not as interested in because of the size.
I've got one last question on the fund. Maybe the others come up, but for right now, from your perspective, JP, why why would a startup want to consider Kern Venture Group? How is Kern Venture Group, from their perspective, going to be different than maybe other funds that they might be considering?
I think because we are based in the Central Valley and we have long lasting, deep relationships in the Central Valley, we can, especially with ag tech or renewable energy, these sectors that are already, pretty dominant in the Central Valley, we can help startups connect with industry, I think, quicker, faster, and to the right groups than someone from outside the area. There's no other um, venture capital or angel fund in the Central Valley. And I'm saying from Bakersfield all the way up to certainly Modesto. You probably get into Sacramento and there would be some. So we're ideally situated. If it's important for you to have, boots on the ground and access to people like us with relationships, um, and secondly, I would say um, we're very willing to roll up our sleeves and help startups. It's not just a passive investment for us. We certainly have some relationships that are more like that than others because every deal is different. Oftentimes we're participating with other investors, but I think that's what makes us different. And the fact that our mission is not just about making money. We're not, a big institution that has to generate a return. We certainly do want to make money on the investment, but there's another side to what we do, and that's trying to support entrepreneurs in the Central Valley. So I think we bring a little bit more of a mission focus to what we do.
Excellent. So let's consider a startup we'll run through the whole process. Let's consider a startup that's coming up in the Central Valley. Let's say they have an idea. A few different companies here will take a few different stages, maybe one that has just the idea, one that has some early traction, and let's say one that has actual revenue on the books. Taking these different stages, JP, what stage would you say is appropriate or best to start communicating with you or reaching out to a fund like yours?
So I would say 80% of our investments come at that early revenue stage. And so it doesn't have to be a certain amount of revenue, but it really helps if you've started to generate revenue, because that tells us that customers are buying into the idea. You've got that validation. Now, that said, your question was, when should they start communicating with us? I would say as soon as you have a minimum viable product and you do have it in the hands of some potential customers that are validating it or piloting it, trialing it, giving you feedback. At that point, we'd love to at least, hear from you and start to build a relationship. It may be too early for us to invest, but we don't mind following things. And oftentimes we will follow a company for a year, sometimes longer, before it's the right time for us to invest. We just had a call like that yesterday, as a matter of fact. This was a gentleman who's got a logistics kind of trucking type of idea, almost like an Uber for trucking, if you will. He first was talking with us in May of 2019. And at the time we felt it was a little early, but we liked the concept and we gave him some advice about how he could bootstrap that idea a little bit further. And so we've stayed in touch. And now here we are almost 2 years later. He's made a lot of traction, hit many, not all of his milestones, but he's hit many of his milestones. And I think we're now going to bring him back to the group and we might write a check now. So that's a good example of how long we're willing to just kind of build a relationship because we learn a lot along the way and you get to know us a little bit along the way as well.
And for our audience here that maybe is considering when they should start reaching out, how much more effective is it, JP, when they've built that relationship early on? Or let's say they just start reaching out early on. I mean, how much more effective is it when it actually comes to those meetings that they've had somewhat of a track record compared to coming in when they just have those milestones completed?
I might ask you to clarify the question there a little bit. I mean, it always, sure. We're always going to spend several meetings getting to know a team. And maybe I should just describe our process for you a little bit more, and that might back into your question. So David and I do all the initial screening and do due diligence. Typically that starts with, we get, a pitch deck or an email with the idea and a little bit of a summary of what you're doing. If we're interested, we'll set up a call. We'll go through that, go through some questions, and usually that'll lead to maybe a couple of other meetings. And maybe we also, like I said, we introduce you to a potential customer or someone we know in our advisor network that has some relevant expertise or domain knowledge. And then maybe again that we report back on that, and that leads to some more questions. So typical it would be 3, 4, 5 meetings or conversations like that. If the company is at the right stage for raising money, we then take the best deals that we like to our partners. And so once a month we have a pitch meeting, and we try to bring two founders or two companies to that pitch meeting every month. And we have you do kind of the typical 12-minute pitch or so, and then we have 10 or 12 minutes for Q&A. And our limited partners get to make kind of an advisory vote to us as the managing partners. It's not binding, but if it is a super majority positive, then David and I continue working with the founders on any remaining due diligence. If we are the lead investor, there's usually we have to go through negotiating the terms if they're not already set. And if all that checks out and we still feel good about it, then the back end, actually David and I present it back to our general partners, and they kind of act like an investment committee. That's kind of the formal binding vote. But David and I are the ones you interact with. We're the ones doing all that work. And about 1/3 of the companies that get invited to pitch to our group end up getting a check from us. And overall, it's about 3% of the companies or the pitch decks that we see make it all the way through to that. So that's the funnel. It is a lot of stuff that we're looking at, and only about 3% actually end up getting an investment.
Well, and that's just the nature of the business here. Just going back to the beginning, if a startup, let's say someone on the audience here is like, okay, well, I'd like to reach out to Current Venture Group. I'm in a stage where I've got my MVP taken care of, where I have some revenue, perhaps they'd be interested. What are some of the ways that you would potentially encourage them to do their research on your fund, what you do, and understand if they are a potential fit or not? So from a cold perspective, and they could apply this to other funds as well.
Yeah, definitely. We're pretty transparent, I think, with what's on our website, which is currentventuregroup.com or currentvg.com. You can find it either way. And we lay out kind of those high-level criteria that we're looking for. And so I would just say you can contact us through that website. That'll generate an email to us, send us your pitch deck, and maybe just point out in that email introduction why you think what you're doing is relevant to the Central Valley or Central California, and why you think might be worth having a conversation. It's not more complicated than that.
And you spoke about, I want to hit these kind of examples that you mentioned. Is you said there's a few companies that from the surface level you wouldn't necessarily see a connection to the Central Valley, but you've determined that. Could you walk us through what those situations were? That way we can understand how your process works.
Yeah, probably maybe the best example is we've invested in a company called Pocket Naloxone, and they have a product that works with an already approved pharmaceutical called Narcan. Narcan is used to help with opioid overdoses. And the opioid pandemic is certainly a problem nationwide, but it is a bigger problem in the Appalachians and also in the Central Valley, as well as methamphetamine overdoses, but Narcan doesn't help with those. And so that right there, knowing that that's an issue in our community, and we are more prone to it, I guess, than other communities, that was enough for us to say this is something that would be helpful to our community. And because it doesn't have to go through FDA trials, because it's just a new way of applying it. It's a swab, like your COVID test. Actually, it's a new application method, so it's much less risky. But that's one that you wouldn't on the surface say, well, what does that have to do with the Central Valley? Well, it's because it's a health and wellness issue for the Central Valley communities. Another one would be NeoCharge, is a company that came out of Cal Poly. They have a adapter that goes into your garage that allows you to split your charging if you have two electric vehicles, if you have electric appliances. And again, so that's kind of renewable energy. Maybe on the surface doesn't seem like it has a strong fit here, but again, renewable energy is we're willing to look at just because it is vital to Kern County at least, and certainly on the statewide level, it's going to be a big industry. So there's a lot of gray area to that, I suppose, and sometimes it's maybe the last one I would mention that's probably the farthest removed and maybe a bit of a stretch, but we invested in a company called Sizzle, and they have an AI tool that helps take esports and video game feeds of competitions or streamers, and it automatically creates highlight reels. So think of like the ESPN for esports, and you would think, well, what in the heck is the connection to there? Well, David in a former life actually was the general manager of a minor league basketball team, the Jam, the Bakersfield Jam, years ago, and so he's got a lot of connections in sports still to this day, and does, I think, some consulting on the side for some of the professional franchises. So that's a really unique one. I'm not encouraging that we want to see a lot of AI or software stuff, but that's probably a really remote example.
Well, it's good. And what I like about it is it shows kind of the breadth of everything that you're dealing with here, paints a good picture. So once they reach out on the website, they're sending a slide deck along with that. One thing that we like to ask a lot of investors, because it's a hot topic, is just kind of what you want to see in a slide deck. So we'll start there. What do you want to see in a slide deck when one gets sent to you? That way you can do your job.
You guys probably have covered this before, but at a real high level, there's 4 things that you need to address. Obviously, what's the product and what's the problem that it's solving? Second thing would be the market. How big is the market? Is it growing? How, what's the competition look like? How are you different than the competition? And then what is your strategy or your plan? How are you going to go to market and monetize that? And then lastly, the team. And I would say the team is probably the most important, because ultimately we're betting on the people. It could be a great idea. We've seen lots of really, really interesting stuff, but if we don't really believe the founder, quite frankly, if we think that maybe we don't get a sense that they've got high integrity, or they've got the drive to really do what it takes to grow a company, or they're not willing to build a team because they think they can do it all on their own, or any number of just kind of personality or character flaws, I guess you could say, that'll kill a deal. No matter how attractive it is financially, how big the market is, how great the product is. If we don't trust the founder or the co-founders, that's it. We move on. So those would be the big 4: product, team, market, and strategy.
So following up on team, what are you looking for? Are you looking for specific credentials, experience, maybe some qualitative things that you can't necessarily capture on a slide deck? I'm not sure, but what are you looking for there to ensure that you have the right feeling moving forward?
It is a blend of qualitative as well as kind of experience and credentials, if you will. David and I personally don't put a lot of weight in, where you went to school or what your degree was in. And I'm one of those guys that has 2 fancy degrees from 2, expensive schools. But I've learned that experience is much more important than education. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that, kind of credentials matter, it would be, do you have relevant industry experience? That's really valuable to us, because that oftentimes allows you to maybe develop relationships with people in the industry that could either be strategic partners or suppliers or customers or investors. So we love seeing kind of strategic partnerships where they make sense. That would be the quantitative side, I guess, would be experience. The qualitative stuff is all those personality traits or characteristics that we're looking for. I think I mentioned a number of those. Maybe one that I didn't mention is Sometimes I think founders can be too rehearsed in their pitch, and they spend so much time and energy on like having this perfect script and how they pitch, and they can become very, very, very polished. And sometimes that will worry us, like, because we want to kind of cut through some of that and really just talk about the business and see if you're able to answer questions when we ask something that isn't maybe on the slide itself or not in your materials. Because if it's just a good rehearsed pitch, but there's not a lot of substance behind it, that's a red flag.
And just to be clear, are they, in your process, are they sending their slide deck with the initial contact us email?
Most of the time, yes. You don't have to, but I mean, pitch decks are kind of this necessary evil in the business, so to speak, because it is, if it's a good deck and it's 12 to 15 pages, it's a good way to introduce your company and what it's doing. And the unfortunate reality is that, yeah, we might only spend 5 minutes flipping through it, and we're going to make a snap judgment whether or not it's interesting and meets kind of our high level criteria. But they work for that purpose, right? It's going to give us an idea of what you're trying to do. So it's just a way to grab attention. We don't have the time to read really lengthy business plans. If you have one, great, we might ask for it, or you could tell us you have it, but I wouldn't send it because we just don't have, we get so many, we don't have time to read 20, 30 pages on the first pass.
So if the deck passes, is that when you invite someone in to pitch to you, whether in person or over Zoom?
If we're interested, yeah, we'll set up a meeting. And right now, yeah, that typically would be a Zoom meeting, or it might just be a phone call. Or if you're in the area and you can come to our office and meet us in person, we love to do that too. So the pitch deck just gets you that first meeting with us, meaning David and I, and we'll do, like I said, maybe 3, 4, 5 of those before we actually get invited to pitch to the full group of partners.
Makes sense. So during this pitch, I know you mentioned that you don't want to be rehearsed. Are there any examples of cases or stories, without saying any names, of good examples or bad examples to avoid, of any real life experience that you've had that our audience here can take away and learn from and apply in their own day-to-day activities with investors?
I think the most common, I guess, mistake that's in this category would be when an investor asks a question, try to be succinct in your answer and directly answer the question. And it's okay to say, I don't know. Sometimes you may not know, or what, I'm working on that. I don't have the answer yet. Can I make sure I understand what you're looking for, what you're getting at? It's better to say that than to just talk around it and meander off on some other rabbit trail. It's okay just to say you don't know. That's the worst thing that I see in many cases is, people, either they don't directly answer the question or they take way too long to answer. Oftentimes we're looking for maybe as simple as a yes, no answer, but people feel the need to say a lot more than just, yeah, that's correct, or just give us the answer. If it's something that's quantifiable, give us the number. Like, that's literally what we're looking for. So don't overthink the question and how to answer it.
Yeah, makes sense. So after this pitch presentation, questions are asked. If a company moves forward, would you mind just telling us again what the next step is?
So again, you might have 3 or 4 meetings with David and myself, and then if we're interested, we bring it to the group and you would present to the full group of partners. Most of these are now, all of them lately have been over Zoom, and we will have 2 companies per month. So you'll do a 10 or 12 minute pitch over Zoom. We'll have some time for Q&A with all the partners, and then you drop off the call. David and I follow up with you, a day or 2 later. Typically, we let you know how it went. Either the group is interested in final due diligence, or if it doesn't go well, we say, hey, we'll give you the feedback as to why and whether or not it makes sense to maybe stay in touch with us. Sometimes it's just not yet. You're too early or whatever. Other times it might just be, it's just not a fit for us. assuming it is positive, then David and I would probably have another 2, 3, 4 meetings with you to go over some questions that typically come up as we in the pitch meeting. And if those are all kind of resolved to our satisfaction, and the deal terms are set and all that stuff, then David and I, behind the scenes, we get final approval from our general partners, and then we make the investment. And maybe your group might be know what is a typical investment from us. So typically we're writing $50,000 to $100,000 checks. We can go as high as $225,000 out of this first fund, but those are typically reserved for companies that are local to Kern County or Fresno area, kind of Central Valley companies. And then with our next fund, we're raising more, so we hope to be able to write larger checks up front with that fund.
Excellent. So one area of, I think, just general interest that we run into is what due diligence looks like. So I know you mentioned we have the pitch, you do a few meetings, if the general partners are good to go. What are the things that you're looking for due diligence, and what can a startup do to be prepared for that? That way it's a very succinct process for you guys.
There's all the basic stuff that you should have. I would say your corporate, organizational documents. That's, your certificate of incorporation, your bylaws, and if you've got patents or trademarks, you want copies of those. If you've raised any money from friends, family, or someone else, copies of those stock purchase agreements or convertible notes, whatever they are. So there's kind of all that legal stuff. Set up a nice data room, organize it into folders. So I would typically look for, those organizational documents. We want to look at any existing financial statements, and then any financial models or projections that you have. We'll want to look for those. Any relevant kind of industry, research or articles, or just, background reading that you think is helpful or that supports some of your thesis. It's nice to put that in there. So just as much as you can put into a data room, I would say the better. It's better to have probably too much and to be well organized than to not have it at all and just not be prepared for that.
Makes sense. Now, considering the check size, what you write into, what type of rounds are you investing in, JP? What type of investment documents are you using? Just any insight would be helpful.
Yeah, we've done a number of different structures, everything from convertible notes. We've done a few safes. If it's a priced round, we'll do preferred stock. I would say, convertible notes and preferred stock is what we like the most. We don't like to do safes. Sometimes that's not up to us if we're not the lead, investment group coming into a round. Typical round for us overall, I guess, or from a company perspective, is I would say most of the stuff we're looking at, the company tends to be raising between 500,000 and maybe $1 million, $1.5 million. That's fairly typical. It usually would be described as a seed round. We've done, I think, a Series A round only maybe once or twice in this fund. We do like to see that there has been some capital put into the business, by friends and family or the founders. It's not to say we won't be the first money in. We've done that on at least 2 deals, maybe another one. So there's no hard and fast rules, but convertible notes and priced, preferred stock rounds is what we like the best.
Excellent. So going a little bit into use of funds, what you'd like to see, and I know it's very company dependent. Do you have a rule of thumb of what you like seeing your money go into as far as what you're specifically investing in inside of the company's operations?
Well, I mean, obviously we want to see that it's going to grow the business. It makes all investors a little bit nervous if the founder maybe has a lot of personal debt or loans they've made to the company and they just want to have those paid off. I've seen that before. And I wouldn't say that doesn't mean you can't do any of that, but it should be a modest amount of the overall round if you've got some personal loans you've made to the business that you'd like to get paid off. Just be upfront about it and be transparent about it, I think is really, really key. If we find out after the fact that a bunch of the capital that you raised was used to pay off things that you didn't disclose, that's not good. It is hard to generalize on this.
Sure.
I would say that most of the time it makes us nervous if the founder wants to spend a huge amount of money on marketing, especially if it's more of a consumer product type of business. Sometimes there's just no substitute for getting out and at this stage of a business, for getting out there and actually having the founder needs to be involved in sales. And just thinking you're going to spend money and have this big marketing campaign or whatever that might look like, depending on the business, that worries us a little bit, because at this stage, the founder has to be, you're really doing two things as a founder. You're raising money and you're selling. Like, that's the job. And yeah, okay, the product, you probably, are doing that, but assuming you've got that product that's ready to go to market, that's your job as a CEO. It's raising money and selling, and you're going to be doing that for the first few years in the business. And so founders who don't want to accept that fact, that's usually a red flag for us. That kind of gets back to what we're looking for in the founding team. We want a team that's going to get out, hustle, and sell, and the founder has to be able to raise money.
Well, and I don't know if this is going to be a good question or not, but
Shoot.
Our program here at the Wet Center our focus is highly on sales. It's no secret for anyone that's gone through, is that's primarily what we focus on. How do you assess if someone is really going to go out there and close the sales and grow this company with a very growth focused or realistic growth perspective on actually pushing sales, not necessarily just marketing? We talk about that quite a bit. How do you assess that?
Yeah, it's actually not very hard. We can usually figure it out pretty easily. So as I mentioned, we like to put companies in front of potential customers in our network. And if the founder doesn't seem to follow through on those introductions or doesn't seem that interested in them, then we've already got our answer. That's pretty straightforward. If we ask it in the form of a question, the question is usually something like, well, tell us how many leads you have in your sales funnel and show us the data on those leads. Where'd they come from? What stages are they in the funnel? And how long have they been there? And what are you doing to convert leads into customers, prospects to leads? Just show us that funnel. And if you don't have a funnel, or you can't really answer that question well, then we have our answer on that one too.
Very clear. Makes sense.
We've seen teams that kind of perpetually get stuck in the lab, and they're more interested in going after grant money or just continuing to refine the product and engineering it and redesigning it. And so that's another symptom that we'll look for. And we've walked away from deals where we just thought the team's never going to get out of that mode, and they don't really understand how that they have to commercialize this at some point. It can't just be endless innovation for innovation's sake.
That's very true. Okay, so we covered the due diligence. What's the so due diligence is cleared. For those that have never gone through this process and you say good to go, what are the next steps after that? Just like on the micro side, is it signing documents and then money hits the account? Is it as simple as that? It
is as simple as that, as assuming you've got your own legal counsel. So I guess it's okay if you don't. It depends on the situation, right? So if you've already got a lead investor, well, I'm gonna back up. Your question was if they haven't go through this. So we'll take that scenario. Let's say this is your first time through, and maybe Kern Venture Group's going to be the first money in, and we're the lead investor. Ideally, you should identify someone that will be your legal counsel, and they could help draft the investment documents themselves. If you don't have that, we are willing to help pick a firm or recommend a firm. You ultimately need to make that choice, but we can refer you to 2 or 3 that do a good job and do it at a reasonable price, that have worked with companies in our portfolio, and that culturally are kind of a good fit for for people like us in the Central Valley. And they'll help draft those investment documents. If we're the lead investor, we're going to have to, negotiate with you on what the terms are. So obviously valuation comes up. You need to be prepared to have your thoughts on that. That usually should either be in that pitch deck or it's on the very first call. We're going to ask you, what's the valuation if it's a priced round? If it's not priced and we're doing a convertible note, we're going to ask you, well, what's the valuation cap? And so be prepared for that. And sometimes you may not even know because you haven't raised any money and you haven't even got that far with anyone. That's okay. We're going to share our thoughts on it. And we will, in that case, we're probably more likely to go ahead and make the first offer and tell you, well, here's what we think is the deal that makes sense for us. And there can be some back and forth on that, but we'll be upfront and just tell you how we see it and go from there. Once we get through all that, then yeah, it's signing the documents. And then typically we're wiring funds to an account.
Excellent. So money's hit, companies starting to grow. What's the interaction like with your, and I know it differs, but maybe you can walk us through the ranges. After the investment is closed, what is the interaction like with companies post-investment?
So what I strongly recommend for any company that's raising money, no matter the structure of the scenario, make sure that you send either a monthly or a quarterly update to all of your investors. All of your investors are really going to appreciate that, right? These people could be friends, family, could be people like Kern Venture Group. They've given you money. You're now like you have a fiduciary duty to show them what you're doing with that money. So communicate, at least, like I said, quarterly's fine. Monthly is really nice, but pick one of the two that works for you and just send out a little memo via email. Doesn't have to be really long, but it should be fairly structured and a little bit formal. So that's the bare minimum that every company should do. Once you take money from other people, you just need to do that. From there, it can scale up in terms of how like a Kern Venture Group would be involved. It might just be that we're following those updates. If we have questions, we reach out to you. We have to give our own investors an update. In our case, we do a formal update twice a year. So if we've just been kind of passively following your updates throughout the year, twice a year, I'll probably reach out to you and say, hey, we wanted to get a little bit more detail on how things are going, because we're writing our update to our investors. And so I'll check in a couple of times a year. That would be the lowest level of involvement from us. The next step up would be one where maybe we're helping you with, industry connections or introductions to other investors. And so we'll have ongoing communication around that. If you're asking for our help, we want to be helpful. We're happy to do that. Next step up from there would be, if we're the lead investor, we're probably, likely to ask for a board seat. And that's an area that I see a lot of founders, maybe don't even really know, well, what does that mean? I've never had a board of directors before. And, typically if you're the founder and you maybe have a co-founder, probably when you set up your company, you just have one director and it's you. Well, as you start taking money, at some point, you'll want to form a board. Typically you might start with 3 directors and maybe one of them is your lead investor. But you need to have quarterly board meetings. Those need to have meeting minutes. It needs to be documented, right? And then over time, you might expand that board to 5 or 7. That's probably years down the road, but we are actively involved on 3 companies' boards now out of our portfolio of 15. So that kind of gives you an idea of a ratio. We're not that involved in every deal, but when we're the lead investor, that's typically something we're going to ask for, as will just about any other angel or venture capital group if they're the lead.
Excellent. And real quick, if anyone in the audience has any questions, feel free to chat them in. If not, I'm going to keep asking away. It's what I do here. So I wanted to transition a little bit further, and then I'll go back a little bit. So as a company continues to grow and develop, and let's say they did a seed round with you, obviously they're going to be considering a Series A. How can the Kern Venture Group, or you specifically, be of value with helping these startups in that process with getting through that Series A process?
Yeah, so You might do more than one seed round, so don't forget that. We've seen many deals where they might have a series seed A1 and then an A2 and an A3. So you could have 2 or 3 rounds that are still considered seed stage. So don't think you have to immediately go for that series A. And a lot of these things are kind of just labels anyways. So whether it's a series A or it's your next round is how I'm going to answer the question.
Yes.
We've just started doing more of this as our companies, we're almost 2.5 years in. So now we're at the point where some of these companies are raising their next round of capital. I mentioned Millet earlier. Millet was ready to raise their first seed round, actually, because we were their only investor for the first almost 2 years. And so they were ready to raise. We helped them refine their pitch deck and update it. And when we felt comfortable, and we also talked them through how to price their next round and how much money to raise, we brought that deal to the Angel Syndication Network, which is it's an organization, I guess, or an affiliation of about 40 or 50 different angel groups all across the United States. We're a member of that group. It's started originally out of Tech Coast Angels, and it's run out of UC Irvine. If we're in a position to be a lead investor in your next round, that allows us to bring your deal to that group of angel groups as kind of a sponsor, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so we did this with Millet. And then you pitch to that group of investors, and there'll be 40, 50 of these people on a Zoom from all across the country will hear you pitch. And they'll indicate interest in the round after the meeting. And this is what Millet did. And they raised $765,000. It was an oversubscribed round, phenomenally successful. And so that's kind of our goal, is that we can help companies go to that next level of, certainly with seed stage, that's what we can do. If you're doing a true Series A, we can be helpful there. One of our advisors is a gentleman named Trevor Thomas Uribe. He's actually in Fresno. His day job is at Bitwise. He's their director of investments. Trevor has a really, really deep and broad network in the venture capital industry and firms. He can be very helpful at that next level of a true Series A. But process-wise, I think it's fairly similar, right? We'll help you refine your pitch deck, and in essence, get you introductions, and then the process kind of goes from there.
Excellent. Now, you did obviously mention Bitwise, obviously the Wet Center, and then Kite as well. What are some of the resources besides just obviously your group? What are some of the resources in the community here throughout the Valley that you've seen be of help to, I guess, support entrepreneurs and get them closer and closer to that level of where they're going to be a good fit for what you're looking for? Have you found any success with entrepreneurs connecting with different resources that has helped them grow and develop to a point where they could potentially fit what you're looking to invest in?
Yeah, there's, I think we still need more entrepreneur support organizations and resources in the Central Valley. But a few that I think are doing some good work over on the coast at Cal Poly. They're running an angel investing conference every year right now. I think that's been a good program, and it's growing. That's like a 6-month process. It's not an accelerator, so it's not like a full-time thing you need to do as a founder. But there's a couple of stages to it where you pitch, and they pool money, small dollar investments from people that are interested in investing in startups, and they pool their money, and the grand prize winner gets, I think last year was about $120,000 investment. That's a good program. We're participating. Actually, Kern Venture Group is participating in that process this year, and I think we'll be looking to decide whether we maybe launch something similar in the Central Valley, or maybe we just help expand that program and it could become a regional angel investing conference. If you're in ag, there are some other resources out there. I know Western Growers has like an innovation center. I don't know it too well, but it's something worth looking into, and usually each different commodity or crop has its own industry association. Some of them have different innovation type of programs, whether it's the Table Grape Commission or the almond board or whatnot. Those sometimes can be helpful from that perspective. And then once you go outside of the Central Valley, there's all kinds of stuff online and that's virtual nowadays. So I wouldn't want to discourage anyone from looking at resources outside the area, because the world is at your fingertips now.
Yeah. Well, makes sense. Well, JP, I know we're towards the end of our time here. We've got about 5 minutes left. I don't see any questions coming in, so I'm going to just ask you probably for a final question here. Is there any final comments, top of the mind thoughts that you'd like to impart to our entrepreneurs that are listening today, or maybe community members, whoever you're thinking of?
I don't know. We've covered a lot. So
quite a bit, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the founder's job is 50% sales, 50% raising money. So maybe I'll just reiterate that it's the hard truth, and you need to be prepared for that. So I think that's always good advice. I think really enjoyed the conversation. Great questions, and happy to connect with people offline, either through the Kern Venture Group website. You can also find me on LinkedIn as well. And always like to see innovative things that are coming up from people here in the Central Valley. So thank you again.
Thank you for joining us today. It's great to have you part of our Wet Center ecosystem here. And to everyone that joined, thank you all for joining. Keep your eye on the email for next month's webinar. We'll be updating our schedule. Great. All good?
Yep. Thank you so much, JP.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Is that good? All right. We'll be in touch.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.